Chapter 1. 4 days earlier. Gabe Hamilton was going to burn in hell, and he didn't give a damn. From the moment Mia Crestwell walked into the ballroom of the Bentley Hotel, where HCM Global Resorts and Hotels was holding their grand opening, he hadn't taken his gaze from her. She was forbidden fruit, his best friend's little sister. Only she wasn't so little anymore, and he had definitely taken notice. She'd become some kind of twisted preoccupation with him. He'd fought it, but found himself unable to resist her powerful lure. He wasn't fighting it any longer. The fact that she was here tonight and Jace was nowhere around only confirmed to Gabe that the time was right and it was time to make his move. He sipped at the glass of wine he held and listened politely to the group he was conversing with, or rather that he was mingling with, since he rarely engaged in anything more than polite pleasantries as he made his rounds through the crowd. He hadn't known she was going to be here. Jace hadn't said a word. Had Jace even known? Gabe thought it was likely he hadn't because not 5 minutes earlier, Jace and Ash had slipped away. A tall, leggy brunette between them as they headed to one of the luxurious suites on the top floor. Jace wouldn't have bailed, even for a woman, if he'd known Mia would be here. But it was just as well Jace wasn't here. It made things a lot easier. Gabe watched as Mia's gaze swept the room, her brow furrowed in concentration as if she searched for someone. A server stopped and offered her wine, and she took one of the elegant long-stemmed glasses, but she didn't put it to her mouth. She was outfitted in a killer dress that hugged her in all the right places, complete with fuck-me shoes and an upswept hairstyle that practically pleaded for a man's hand to tug it down. Dark tendrils floated softly down her neck, drawing attention to the slender column that begged a man's lips. He was damn tempted to stride across the room and wrap his coat around her so that no one else would see what he considered his. Jesus, and if that didn't make this even more insane. She wasn't his anything. But that, too, was going to change. The off-the-shoulder cocktail dress drew attention to her breasts, and he damn sure didn't want anyone else looking. And men were looking. Already she'd drawn the attention of others. They stared, like he did, their gazes predatory. She wore a delicate chain with a diamond solitaire around her neck, and diamond studs adorned both ears. Both had been a gift from him a year earlier. For Christmas. It gave him satisfaction to see her wearing the things he'd bought for her tonight. For him, it was one more step in the inevitable direction of her being his. She didn't know it yet, but he'd waited long enough. He'd endured enough time of feeling like the worst sort of criminal for lusting after his best friend's baby sister. When she'd turned 20, it had marked a huge difference in the way he viewed her. But he'd been 34, and he knew she was still far too young for what he expected from her. And so, he'd waited. She was an obsession, and it made him uncomfortable to admit, but she was a drug in his veins he had no desire to cure himself of. Now that she was 24, the age difference didn't seem so insurmountable. Or so he told himself. Jace would still go ballistic. After all, Mia would always be his baby sister. But Gabe was willing to take the risk to finally taste forbidden fruit. Oh, yes. He had plans for Mia. He had but to put them into action. Mia took a cautious sip of her wine, a glass she'd only taken so she didn't feel quite so out of place in a sea of beautiful, rich people. And she looked anxiously around for Jace. He said he'd be here, and she'd decided to surprise him by popping in for the grand opening of HCM's newest hotel. Located in Union Square, it was modern and lush, obviously catering to an upscale clientele. But then Jace and his two best friends lived and breathed in that world. They'd worked damn hard to get there, but they'd achieved success beyond most people's imagination, and they'd done it by the time they reached their 30s. At 38, they were touted as some of the most successful hoteliers in the world. But they were still just her brother and his best friends. Well, except Gabe. But perhaps it was time to get over her embarrassing teenage fantasies where he was concerned. At 16, it was understandable. At 24, it just made her